Before you reach for that box of dye again, I want you to hold off. Not forever. Just long enough to hear something that might genuinely change how you think about what's happening to your hair. You've probably done this same routine more times than you can count. Maybe it's the salon, every 4 to 6 weeks, sitting under that cape while someone mixes color that's supposed to match what your hair used to look like naturally. Maybe it's your own bathroom, gloves on, timer set on your phone, hoping this batch turns out a little more convincing than the last one. Either way, you know the drill by heart. You know the smell of the developer, the itch on your scalp 20 minutes in, the moment of relief when you rinse, and the color actually looks close to right. And you've probably also had that quieter moment afterward, standing in front of the mirror once your hair has dried, wondering if this is simply what you're stuck doing from now on, every month, for the rest of your life. That thought alone is worth sitting with for a second, because I don't think it has to be true. I want to offer you a different way to think about what's happening in your hair follicles right now. It isn't random, and it isn't a personal failing. It's a process, a biological one, with an actual mechanism behind it. And a process that has a mechanism is a process you can potentially influence, sometimes in ways that surprise you. So before you go through the routine again, I want to walk you through what's really going on beneath the surface and introduce you to a vitamin that most people have genuinely never heard of in this context. It plays a specific, almost mechanical role in your body's ability to hold on to pigment, and there's a particular way of getting it that seems to matter far more than most people realize. Stay with me, because by the end, I'll show you exactly what that is, where you can find it without buying anything fancy, and how people have actually used it. I understand if it sounds unlikely that a vitamin could do much of anything here. I've spent a long stretch of my career looking at where nutrition and the aging process intersect, and I was skeptical myself the first time I came across this research. So I'm not asking you to take any of this on faith. I'm going to walk through the mechanism plainly, in order, so you can judge it for yourself as we go. Let's start with what gray hair actually is, because most of us were taught an incomplete explanation somewhere along the way. The common version goes something like this. It's genetic, it's tied to some internal clock, and once a strand turns white, that's the end of the story. That explanation isn't entirely wrong, but it leaves out the part that actually matters if you're trying to do something about it. Your hair gets its color from cells called melanocytes, which live inside each individual hair follicle. These cells manufacture a pigment called melanin, and that pigment determines the shade of every strand on your head, whether it's black, brown, red, or somewhere in between. When you're younger, those cells work steadily, producing pigment strand after strand for years, without much interruption. You don't think about them at all because there's nothing to notice. They're simply doing their job. Somewhere around your mid-30s, something starts to shift quietly inside the follicle. A molecule begins accumulating there, one you probably associate with a brown bottle under your bathroom sink, rather than your own body. Hydrogen peroxide. Your cells produce small amounts of it naturally as a byproduct of ordinary metabolism, all day, every day. Under normal circumstances, an enzyme called catalase breaks it down almost as quickly as it appears, so it never builds up enough to cause any trouble at all. But here's what changes with age. Catalase production tends to decline gradually, year after year, without any obvious signal that it's happening. And when catalase drops, the hydrogen peroxide it used to clear away starts to accumulate instead. Picture a drain that used to keep pace with the water running into it, slowly getting more sluggish until the water starts pooling around your feet instead of disappearing. That pooling, happening quietly inside the follicle, affects the melanocytes living there directly. It bleaches them from the inside, cell by cell, strand by strand, which is a slower and far less dramatic process than it sounds, but a real one all the same. So here's the question worth asking. What happens if you help your body get catalase production back on track before it declines any further? That's where the next part gets genuinely interesting, and it's the part I most wanted to share with you today. There's a vitamin that plays a direct, structural role in how your body builds catalase in the first place. It's called PABA, short for para-aminobenzoic acid. You won't hear it mentioned on morning television or see it printed across a supplement bottle at the front of the pharmacy, but inside nutritional biochemistry circles, it's been studied in connection with hair pigmentation for well over 60 years. It's sometimes grouped loosely with the B vitamin family, and it gets a small fraction of the attention that biotin or B12 receive, despite having a longer research trail behind it than either one. One of the earliest studies on this dates back to the 1940s, when a researcher gave PABA to a group of people who were experiencing early graying, some of them still in their 20s and 30s. The results were documented as a noticeable return of pigment in a meaningful portion of participants. Not a subtle shift you'd need a magnifying glass to see, but something visibly different to the people around them. Later research expanded on that original work, pairing PABA with other B vitamins like pantothenic acid and folic acid, and found that combination produced even more pronounced results in some of the people studied, including some who had been fully gray for years before starting. Now, PABA doesn't just work through one channel. There are 3 separate pathways where it seems to influence this process, and I want to walk through each one individually, because understanding how something works is usually what separates a real result from a coincidence. The first is the catalyst pathway I already mentioned a moment ago. PABA acts as a raw material your body draws on to keep catalyst production running smoothly. Think of your cells as a small factory that manufactures catalysts around the clock, day and night, without you ever noticing. Over time, that factory starts running short on the materials it needs to keep pace, and production slows down accordingly. Giving your body more PABA is a bit like restocking the supply chain feeding that factory. Production can pick back up, hydrogen peroxide levels start coming back down toward normal, and the melanocytes finally get some room to recover from years of quiet damage. That's the first pathway on its own. What does that actually change day to day? Mostly, it means the underlying chemical environment inside your follicle starts shifting back toward what it looked like when you were younger, even before you see anything different in the mirror. The second pathway has to do with melanin production itself, and it's a bit different in character from the first. This one isn't about defense or damage control. It's about actively encouraging more pigment to be made. PABA has been shown in laboratory settings to support the activity of an enzyme called tyrosinase, which melanocytes rely on to convert raw materials into finished melanin pigment. Without tyrosinase functioning properly, pigment production essentially stalls out, no matter how healthy the surrounding cell otherwise is. So where the first pathway clears away what's blocking the system, this second pathway gives the pigment-making machinery an actual nudge forward. Picture it as the difference between unclogging a pipe and turning up the water pressure running through it. Both matter, but they're solving 2 different problems. The third pathway is the one that surprised me most when I first came across it, and it has almost nothing to do with your hair directly, at least not at first glance. It has to do with your gut. Research over the last decade or so has shown that certain bacteria living in your digestive tract actually produce B vitamins on their own, including PABA, and your body absorbs and distributes them from there to wherever they're needed. As people age, the overall diversity of gut bacteria tends to shift, and some of the specific strains responsible for producing these vitamins become measurably less abundant. A study examining gut microbiome composition in people over 60 found meaningful differences compared to younger adults, particularly among the bacterial populations most closely tied to B vitamin production. So there, you have 3 moving parts, working in 3 different directions, but all pointing back to the same outcome. The enzyme system that clears hydrogen peroxide out of the follicle, the enzyme system that actually builds new melanin, and the population of gut bacteria supplying the raw material connecting both of those systems together. None of this is a wellness trend I stumbled across somewhere online at random. It comes out of published research spanning decades and multiple fields, all converging on the same conclusion from 3 separate angles. Here's where this gets genuinely practical, and it's the part I suspect you've been waiting for. There's a food that contains PABA in a form your body appears to use particularly well, and there's a decent chance it's already sitting somewhere in your kitchen right now, forgotten in the back of a cabinet. It's blackstrap molasses, the thick, almost black syrup left behind after sugarcane has gone through several rounds of boiling to extract the refined sugar crystals. What's left over isn't sweet in the way you'd expect from anything with molasses in the name. It's dense, slightly bitter, and packed with minerals that got stripped completely out of the white sugar sitting next to it on the shelf. Blackstrap molasses doesn't just contain PABA in isolation. It carries a set of supporting nutrients alongside it, and those supporting nutrients matter more than people usually assume. Because PABA doesn't do its job in isolation either, there are 4 of them worth knowing by name. The first is copper, which works directly alongside tyrosinase, the same enzyme from a moment ago that's responsible for actually assembling melanin. The second is iron, which helps carry oxygen to the follicle, keeping the whole area better supplied with the basics it needs to function. The third and fourth are additional B vitamins, specifically pantothenic acid and B6, both of which work in tandem with PABA rather than competing against it for absorption. Take PABA on its own as an isolated supplement pill, and you get one piece of a 4-piece puzzle. Get it from something like blackstrap molasses instead, and you get the whole supporting cast delivered together, the way it tends to show up in nature to begin with. If any part of what you've just heard is landing for you, if you're sitting there thinking about how many mornings you've spent quietly covering this up instead of ever addressing what's actually causing it, this is the moment I genuinely appreciate you hitting subscribe right here before we get into exactly how to use any of this. This channel exists to dig into research like this, the kind that rarely makes it into a rushed 15-minute appointment, and I don't want you to miss whatever comes next. Now let's get into exactly how to put this into practice, because the details here matter quite a bit more than people expect. Start with 1 tablespoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses each morning. Unsulfured is the word to actually look for on the label because it means the molasses wasn't treated with sulfur dioxide as a preservative during processing. That matters because sulfur compounds can interfere with copper absorption, and copper, as we just covered, is one of the 4 supporting players in this entire process. Skip that detail and you undercut everything else before you've even started. Dissolve that tablespoon into a cup of warm water, not hot. Hot water can degrade some of the more heat-sensitive B vitamins in the mix before your body ever gets a chance to absorb them, while warm water dissolves the molasses just as effectively without cooking anything valuable out of it. Stir it until it's fully mixed in and the water turns a uniform, dark, even color, with no streaks of syrup left clinging to the bottom of the glass. Drink it first thing in the morning, before coffee, before tea, before breakfast, on a completely empty stomach. The reasoning here is straightforward once you think about it. Minerals and B vitamins absorb more efficiently when they aren't competing with a stomach full of other food for the same absorption pathways. An empty stomach gives your body the clearest possible route to actually take these nutrients in rather than passing most of them through unused. That's the entire core of it. One simple habit, repeated daily, first thing every morning, before anything else competes for your body's attention. I know the next question on your mind because it's the one everyone eventually asks. How long before you'd actually see something change? I want to be straightforward with you here rather than promise something unrealistic just to keep you watching. Hair pigmentation is slow by its very nature. You're not applying a color on top of your hair. You're rebuilding a biochemical environment that gradually broke down over years, sometimes decades, and that kind of rebuilding simply doesn't happen on a timeline measured in days. There are 3 stages people tend to notice, based on what's been documented in the research and what people practicing this consistently have reported back over time. The first stage happens within roughly the first month, and it's mostly about overall hair quality rather than color itself. More shine, less brittleness, a general sense that your hair simply feels healthier when you run your fingers through it. That's your body responding to improved mineral status and better circulation reaching the follicle. And it's a genuine sign the rest of the process is already underway, even before any pigment shift becomes visible. The second stage tends to show up around month 2, and it's considerably subtler than the first. Many people notice that new gray growth seems to slow down compared to before. The gray hairs already present don't disappear overnight, and you shouldn't expect them to, but the rate at which new ones appear seems to taper off noticeably. This one is easy to miss entirely if you aren't paying close attention, so it helps to actually look for it in good light, rather than simply wait for something dramatic to happen on its own. The third stage is the one people are really waiting for, and it tends to show up somewhere around month 3 or 4 of consistent use. This is when visible repigmentation starts to become noticeable, usually first right at the root, closest to the scalp. You might notice a single strand where the base is distinctly darker than the rest of the hair, a clear line marking where new growth is coming in with more color than what grew in before it. That's typically the moment that convinces people this is actually working, because at that point it isn't subjective anymore. It's something you can point to in a mirror and show someone else. Consistency is really the entire game here, more than any single ingredient or technique. Your body spent years, in some cases decades, gradually losing catalase and letting hydrogen peroxide quietly build up in the background. That kind of slow shift doesn't reverse itself in a week, and expecting it to is probably the single fastest way to give up right before anything visible starts to change. There's one more piece I want to add to this, because on its own, it seems to multiply the effect of everything we've already covered, and it's something almost nobody discusses in this particular context. It's scalp massage using rosemary oil. I understand if that sounds like it belongs in a completely different conversation altogether, but the connection actually holds up under scrutiny. Massage increases blood circulation to the hair follicle, and better circulation means better delivery of everything we've been discussing throughout this video. The PABA, the copper, the iron, all of it, carried more efficiently to the exact cells that need it most. Rosemary oil adds another layer of benefit on top of that circulation boost. It's been studied specifically for its effects on scalp health, and some research has even compared its effects favorably to standard pharmaceutical treatments for hair thinning when used consistently over several months. Here's the protocol for that particular piece. Twice a week, mix about 5 drops of rosemary essential oil with roughly a teaspoon of a carrier oil. Jojoba or coconut both work perfectly fine for this. Massage the blend into your scalp using small, deliberate circular motions, making sure to cover the entire scalp rather than just the front hairline or the crown where most people naturally focus. Spend a full 5 minutes on this, not 90 seconds. It genuinely takes a few minutes of sustained massage before blood flow to the area actually peaks, so cutting the process short means missing most of the benefit you're trying to get from it in the first place. Do this in the evening, leave the oil in overnight while you sleep, and simply wash it out the next morning as part of your regular routine. Put those two habits together, the molasses each morning and the scalp massage twice a week, and you have a routine addressing this from more than one direction simultaneously rather than relying on a single mechanism to do all the work alone. Now, I want to address something people ask me about constantly, because it comes up almost every time this particular topic gets discussed anywhere online. What about catalase supplements themselves? Wouldn't it make more sense to just take the enzyme directly rather than the raw material your body needs in order to build more of it on its own? It's a completely reasonable question on the surface, but there's a basic biological problem with that approach. Catalase is a protein. When you swallow a protein of any kind, your digestive system breaks it down into individual amino acids before it's ever absorbed into your bloodstream. It doesn't survive the trip through your stomach intact, and it certainly doesn't travel onward to your hair follicles, still functioning as a working enzyme. You simply cannot eat an enzyme and expect it to show up somewhere else in your body, still doing its original job. That's precisely why the PABA approach makes more practical sense than trying to supplement the enzyme directly. Instead of attempting to import a finished product from outside your body, you're supplying the raw material your body already knows how to use, letting it build more of that enzyme itself, right inside the cells where it's actually needed. Your body hasn't forgotten how to do this. It's simply been running short on the supplies required to keep doing it at full capacity. There's one more thing worth covering before we wrap up here, and it's something that might quietly be working against you without your realizing it. Hair dye itself may be part of what's accelerating this entire process. I'm not saying that to alarm you, and I'm certainly not telling you to throw away every bottle sitting under your sink today. But it's worth understanding what's actually happening at a chemical level when you apply a permanent dye. Most permanent hair color contains a compound that reacts with hydrogen peroxide in order to actually produce visible color in the first place. Without hydrogen peroxide present, most of these products simply wouldn't work at all. Think carefully about what that actually means for a moment. Every single time you apply a permanent dye, you're introducing additional hydrogen peroxide directly onto your scalp and into your hair follicles, the exact same molecule that's already quietly accumulating there as a normal part of aging, the exact same molecule your declining catalase levels are already struggling to clear out on their own. You're effectively adding fuel to a pile that's already building up in the background. Some research on long-term use of oxidative hair dyes has found associations with higher markers of oxidative stress measured in the scalp and follicle over time. Put simply, plenty of people end up caught in a cycle without ever realizing it's happening. Gray hair shows up, so they dye it to cover it. The dye introduces more hydrogen peroxide into the follicle. That extra hydrogen peroxide adds more stress to whatever melanocytes are still functioning. More of those cells sustain damage. More gray hair appears as a result, and the entire cycle repeats itself a few weeks later, seemingly without end. Breaking that particular cycle really comes down to two things, and I want to be clear that both matter equally. The first is reducing your ongoing exposure to hydrogen peroxide at the source, which usually means gradually moving away from permanent oxidative dyes over time, rather than relying on them indefinitely. That transition doesn't have to happen overnight, and I wouldn't recommend rushing it. A gradual shift toward henna-based color or semi-permanent options that don't require a peroxide developer at all is a completely reasonable middle step, and those alternatives tend to be considerably gentler on the follicle in the long run. The second is simply staying consistent with everything else we've already covered together. The molasses each morning without fail, the rosemary oil twice a week without skipping it, and enough patience to actually let the underlying process play out on its own natural timeline. Before I let you go, I want to say something that genuinely matters to me, and I want to say it carefully. Gray hair isn't a flaw, and it never was. For plenty of people, it represents a life fully lived, hard-earned experience worn openly rather than hidden away. And if you've made peace with yours, that's a genuinely good thing. Nothing I've shared with you today is meant to talk you out of that choice, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. But I also know that for a lot of people watching this right now, gray hair never felt like a choice at all. It showed up earlier than expected, it aged the way you look faster than the way you actually feel on the inside, and every trip to the salon slowly started feeling less like ordinary self-care and more like maintenance on something you never asked to have to maintain in the first place. If that description feels closer to how you actually experience this, I wanted you to know there's a real biological pathway here worth exploring. Not a miracle, not something that happens overnight while you sleep, but something genuinely real, backed by decades of accumulated research, sitting quietly in your kitchen cabinet the entire time, waiting to be used. If you found this helpful, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss whatever comes next, because there's a lot more research like this I still want to walk you through with you. Drop a comment below and tell me when you first noticed your own gray coming in, whether it was your 30s, your 40s, or later than that, and what it actually felt like when you first noticed it happening. If you decide to actually try this yourself, the molasses each morning, the rosemary oil twice a week, all of it together, come back in a few months and tell me honestly how it went for you. I read every single comment that comes through on this channel, and your own experience might end up being exactly what convinces someone else watching to finally give it a try for themselves. And if there's someone in your life who's been quietly dealing with this same thing, a sister, a close friend, someone you sit next to at the salon every few weeks without ever really talking about it, go ahead and send this video to her. It costs you nothing but a minute of your time, and for her, it might turn out to be exactly the information she's been missing all along. Take care of yourself. Your body has carried you this far already, and with the right information behind you, it can carry you a great deal further still.